The heavy oak doors of the Emerson dining hall were locked from the inside. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, swirling a glass of vintage red wine that had been aging in the cellar for longer than I had been alive. Across from me sat Uncle Silas, Aunt Beatrice, and my cousin Schuyler. Their faces were pale, sweat beading on their foreheads, as they stared at the large projector screen I had set up behind me. On the screen, a crystal-clear video was playing, a recording of the three of them in the kitchen just 2 hours ago, whispering about which specific vial of white powder would be the quickest and quietest to slip into my tea. "You look surprised, Silas," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just leaned back in the chair that used to belong to my grandmother. "Did you really think I hadn't noticed the bitter aftertaste in the scones Beatrice so lovingly baked for me this morning? Or did you think I was as blind as you assumed Grandma Diana was before she passed?" "Jade, honey, that's a misunderstanding," Beatrice stammered, her hands trembling so violently that her diamond rings clattered against her china plate. We were talking about a supplement. For your health. You've looked so tired lately." I clicked a button on a small remote, and the video paused on a frame where Silas was holding a small glass bottle labeled arsenic trioxide. The room went deathly silent. "A supplement for my health? Or a permanent solution for your debts? You spent the last decade waiting for Diana to die, only to find out she left everything to the one person you treated like a servant. And now, you've spent the last 48 hours trying to make sure I follow her to the grave." I took a slow sip of my wine, watching the panic rise in their eyes. "But here is the twist you didn't see coming. Every second of this week has been a test. And you just failed the final exam. To understand how my own flesh and blood ended up trying to murder me over a dinner table, you have to understand the life of Jade Emerson. For 20 years, I was the invisible Emerson. While Silas was busy failing at real estate ventures and Beatrice was spending thousands on socialite parties to keep up appearances, I was the one living in a small, drafty cottage at the edge of the estate. I was the one who woke up at 5 a.m. to help Grandma Diana into her wheelchair. I was the one who read to her when her eyes grew too weak. And I was the one who held her hand through the long, painful nights while the rest of the family only called to ask if her will was updated. They treated me like the hired help. Schuyler, my cousin, used to toss her laundry at me as if I were a maid. "Make sure there are no creases, Jade," she'd sneer, her eyes locked on her phone. "Some of us actually have a social life to maintain." Beatrice would barely acknowledge my presence unless she needed her shoes polished or a message delivered to the gardener. They looked down on me because I chose to stay by Diana's side instead of chasing the shallow prestige they valued. They thought I was weak, a quiet girl with no ambition, perfectly content with the crumbs they tossed my way. When Diana finally passed away last month, the vultures descended before her body was even cold. Silas arrived at the funeral in a brand new Italian suit he couldn't afford, already talking about how he was going to subdivide the estate into luxury condos. Beatrice was eyeing the family jewels, already mentally listing them on high-end auction sites. They were so convinced that the inheritance would be split between the true heirs that they actually hugged me at the wake, a fake, hollow gesture of pity. "Don't worry, Jade," Silas had whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "We'll make sure you have a nice little apartment somewhere. You've been so helpful to Mother." But the reading of the will was the first crack in their fairy tale. We sat in the lawyer's office, the air thick with greed. When the lawyer announced that Diana had left the entirety of the Emerson fortune, the mansion, the 500-acre estate, the offshore accounts, and the family's historic jewelry collection, to me, the silence was deafening. It wasn't just a surprise. It was a total demolition of their reality. Silas turned a shade of purple I didn't know was humanly possible. Beatrice fainted, a perfectly timed dramatic fall that no one bothered to catch. "This is a mistake," Silas roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk. "My mother was senile. Jade manipulated her. She's been whispering in her ear for years, poisoning her mind against us." The lawyer didn't blink. "Actually, Mr. Emerson, there is a video statement from your mother recorded just 3 days before her passing. In it, she explicitly states that her mind is clear and that she is leaving her estate to the only person who treated her like a human being, rather than a bank account." I walked out of that office as the wealthiest woman in the state, but I knew I was also the most hunted. I knew the Emersons wouldn't just walk away. They were drowning in debt and ego, and a servant girl like me holding the keys to their kingdom was an insult they couldn't endure. 2 days later, the red flag started appearing. It began with the unexpected kindness. Silas, who hadn't spoken 10 words to me in 5 years, suddenly showed up at the mansion with an expensive bottle of wine and a plan to help me manage the family's assets. "It's a lot for a young girl to handle, Jade," he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "Let your Uncle Silas take the burden off your shoulders. Just sign these power of attorney documents, and you can go back to your quiet life." Then came Beatrice and Schuyler. They insisted on moving into the mansion to, quote, keep me company during my time of grief. They were suddenly interested in my hobbies, my diet, and my schedule. But I noticed the small things. I noticed Silas lurking in the hallway outside my bedroom at 2 a.m. I noticed Schuyler trying to guess the passcode on my laptop whenever I left the room. And most importantly, I noticed the change in the kitchen. Grandma Diana had been a paranoid woman in her final years, but she was also brilliant. She had installed a state-of-the-art, hidden surveillance system throughout the mansion, not for security against outsiders, but to watch her own children. She had given me the access codes on her deathbed. "Watch the vultures, Jade," she had whispered. "They only show their true feathers when they think the lights are out." I started checking the footage every night. I watched Silas searching the floorboards for a second will that didn't exist. I watched Beatrice going through my medicine cabinet, looking for something she could use to blackmail me. But the horror peaked 3 days ago. I watched the three of them huddled in the library, their faces illuminated by a single lamp. "If she has an accident, the estate goes to the next of kin," Silas whispered, his voice trembling with a dark desperation. "The lawyer said the will doesn't have a contingency for her death. If Jade is out of the picture, we are back in the money. It has to look natural," Beatrice added, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "A fall? Or maybe something she ingests? She's always had a weak constitution, hasn't she?" I sat in the dark surveillance room, my heart hammering against my ribs. They weren't just greedy, they were lethal. They had moved into my home not to support me, but to scout the best place to end me. In that moment, the quiet girl they thought they knew vanished. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted them to reveal every layer of their malice. I wanted to record the full extent of their betrayal, so that when I finally struck back, there would be no room for legal loopholes or family sympathy. I began my own counterplay. I started acting more vulnerable. I told them I was feeling dizzy, that the stress of the inheritance was getting to me. I saw the way their eyes lit up at the news. It was the signal they were waiting for. I watched on the cameras as Beatrice bought the arsenic from a disgraced chemist she knew. I watched as they discussed the family dinner, where they would finally execute their plan. The tension in the house was suffocating. Every meal felt like a Russian roulette. I stopped eating anything they prepared, secretly disposing of the food in the cottage, and living on sealed protein bars I kept hidden in a floor safe. But to them, I looked like I was wasting away. I played the part of the fading heiress perfectly. The morning of the dinner, Silas was almost giddy. He kept checking the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the hours. "Tonight is a new beginning for the Emersons," he toasted at lunch, his eyes darting toward the kitchen where Beatrice was preparing the special course. "A new beginning indeed, Uncle," I replied, my voice soft and obedient. "I've even decided to update my will today. I realized that if anything happened to me, I'd want the family to be taken care of. That was the bait." I saw the three of them exchange a look of pure triumph. They thought they had won. They thought they were going to get the money and my life in one clean sweep. They had no idea that the updated will I had drafted was a legal landmine designed to blow their lives apart. As I sat there in the dining hall, the video of their conspiracy playing on the wall behind me, I watched the triumph turn into a cold, paralyzing terror. They were trapped in a room with a woman who knew their darkest secrets, and the doors weren't opening until I was finished. "You see, Silas," I said, leaning forward into the light. "Grandma Diana knew you better than you knew yourself. She didn't just leave me the money. She left me her eyes. And through her eyes, I've seen everything." I stood up, the remote in my hand. "You thought you were the hunters, but you forgot one thing. The person you treat like a servant is the one who knows exactly how you like your tea and exactly where you hide your sins." The first part of my plan was complete. I had the evidence. I had the shock, but the real cold revenge was just beginning. They thought the video was the end of the night. They had no idea that I had already sent a copy to the local precinct, or that the will I mentioned earlier was already signed, sealed, and waiting to be the final nail in their coffins. I looked at the clock. 8:15 p.m. The police will be here in exactly 10 minutes, I said, watching Beatrice collapse into a sobbing heap. But before they arrive, I think it's time we discuss the new house rules, because as of this moment, none of you are Emersons anymore. You're just guests, and your reservation has just been permanently canceled. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8:20 p.m. The chime echoed through the silent dining hall like a funeral bell. Uncle Silas was still staring at the projector screen, his mouth hanging open, while Aunt Beatrice had collapsed into her chair, her expensive silk shawl dragging in the remnants of the dinner she had poisoned. Skylar, the cousin who had spent years treating me like a floor mat, was frantically deleting messages on her phone, her breath coming in jagged hitches. "It's too late for that, Skylar," I said, not even looking at her. "I've already mirrored your cloud storage. Every text you sent to your boyfriend about how you were going to spend the inheritance on a villa in Ibiza once I was taken care of is already on a secure server at the precinct." Silas finally found his voice, though it was weak and cracking. "Jade, let's be reasonable. We're family. Blood is thicker than water. You can't send your own uncle to prison over a momentary lapse in judgment. We were under so much stress, the debts, the pressure of the Emerson name. It drove us to a dark place. Please, just turn off the recording. We can settle this privately." A momentary lapse in judgment? I leaned forward, the candlelight reflecting in my eyes. "You spent 4 days measuring the dosage of arsenic. You discussed whether to push me down the cellar stairs or wait for the poison to work. That's not a lapse, Silas. That's a premeditated execution. And as for blood being thicker than water, you only cared about my blood when you thought you could spill it to refill your bank accounts." I stood up and walked over to the sideboard, picking up a legal document bound in blue leather. "You were so excited when I mentioned I was updating my will this morning. You thought I was making you the beneficiaries. You were so blinded by greed that you didn't even ask to see the draft." I flipped the page open and laid it on the table. "This is the Emerson contingency. I signed it 3 hours ago, in front of 2 witnesses and a notary." Beatrice looked up, her mascara running down her face. What? What does it say?" "It says that the moment I am declared dead or incapacitated by anything other than natural causes, the entire Emerson estate, including this house, the land, and every cent in the accounts, is immediately transferred to the National Foundation for Victim Support. Not a single penny goes to a Sinclair or an Emerson descendant. And here's the best part. The document includes an immediate eviction clause. If I die, you are kicked out of this mansion within 60 minutes, with nothing but the clothes on your backs." Silas reached for the paper, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. The realization hit him like a physical blow. By trying to kill me, they had ensured that even if they succeeded, they would get absolutely nothing. I had turned my own life into a poison pill. If I went down, I was taking their entire future with me. "You're a monster," Skylar hissed, her fake nice persona finally shattering into pure vitriol. "No," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "I'm an Emerson. I learned from the best. I learned from Grandma Diana that the only way to deal with vultures is to take away the meat." At that moment, the blue and red lights of the police cruisers began to flash against the dining room windows. The sirens were low, almost respectful, as they pulled up the long gravel driveway. I watched as Silas tried to run toward the back exit, only to find that I had locked the electronic security system from my tablet. They were trapped in the very luxury they had tried to steal. The arrest was quiet. The detectives had seen the footage I sent. They had the vial of arsenic that I had recovered from the kitchen trash after Beatrice thought she had hidden it. As the officers led them out in handcuffs, Silas turned back to me one last time. "You'll be alone in this big empty house, Jade. You have no one. You've destroyed your family." "I didn't destroy this family, Silas," I said as the door began to close. "I just performed the autopsy. It was dead long before I took over." The weeks following the Emerson scandal were a whirlwind. The news called it the arsenic inheritance. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post on social media. I spent that time working with the lawyers to ensure that Silas, Beatrice, and Skylar faced the full weight of the law. They weren't just charged with attempted murder, they were charged with conspiracy and financial fraud. Their debts were made public, and the prestigious Emerson name they cared so much about became a synonym for greed and betrayal. But the real revenge wasn't the prison sentences. It was the silence. I returned to the mansion 1 month later. It was quiet, not the oppressive, scary silence of when they lived there, but a peaceful, clean silence. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I sat in the garden, watching the sunset over the 500 acres that were now mine to protect, not to sell. I realized then that I didn't need a sprawling estate to be happy. I stayed in the small cottage at the edge of the woods, turning the big mansion into a retreat for women who had survived domestic and financial abuse. I used the Emerson fortune to build the very sanctuary I had lacked. I kept one thing from the main house: Grandma Diana's journals. In the very last entry, dated the day before she died, she had written, "Jade thinks she is serving me, but she is actually mastering the house. She is the only one with the heart to lead and the steel to survive. I leave her the keys not because she is family, but because she is the only one who won't lose her soul to the gold." I closed the book, a single tear finally escaping. I wasn't the poor relative anymore. I wasn't the maid. I was the architect of my own destiny. The lesson for every girl watching this is simple. People will mistake your kindness for weakness. They will think that because you are quiet, you are not observant. They will think that because you serve, you do not lead. Let them think that. Let them underestimate you. Use that time to build your own strength, to gather your own evidence, and to learn their moves. Never settle for the crumbs of a family that only values you for what you can do for them. Real love doesn't come with a price tag, and it certainly doesn't come with a vial of poison. If the people in your life make you feel like you're an outsider, start building your own world. You don't need their permission to be the main character of your own story. I was the Emerson they ignored, and now I'm the only Emerson left. I sat at a table for one, and for the first time in my life, the company was exactly what I needed. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever felt like a stranger in your own family? Have you ever noticed red flags in the people who claim to love you, but you stayed because you felt you had to? What was the moment you realized you were worth more than the role they gave you? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your story might be the wake-up call someone else needs to hear today.